Lesson 4: The history of taxes and the power of corporations. My rich dad just played the game smart, and he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. I remember in school being told the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. My teacher thought it was a wonderful story of a romantic hero who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. My rich dad did not see Robin Hood as a hero. He called Robin Hood as a crook. Robin Hood may be long gone, but his follower lives on. I often still hear people say, why don't the rich people pay for it? Or the rich should pay more in taxes and give it to the poor. It is this Robin Hood fantasy or taking from the rich to give to the poor that has caused the most pain for the poor and the middle class. The reason the middle class is so heavily taxed is because of the Robin Hood ideal. The reality is that the rich are not taxed. It's the middle class, especially the educated upper income middle class, who pay for the tax. Again, to understand fully how things happen, we need to look at the history of taxes. Although my highly educated dad was an expert on the history of education, my rich dad fashioned himself as an expert on the history of taxes. Rich Dad explained to Mike and me that originally in England and America there were no taxes. Occasionally there was temporary taxes levied in order to pay for war. The king or the president would put the words out and ask everyone to chip in. The taxes were levied in Britain for a fight against Napoleon from 1799 to 1860. In America, to pay for the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. In 1874, England made income tax a permanent levy on its citizens. In 1930, an income tax became permanent in the United States. With the adoption of the 16th Amendment to the US Constitution, at one time, America were anti tax. It had been the tax on tea that led to the famous Tea Party in Boston Harbor, an incident that helped ignite the Revolutionary War. It took approximately 50 years in both England and United States to sell the idea of a regular income tax. What these history dates fail to reveal is that both of these taxes were initially levied against only the rich. It was the this point that Rich Dad wanted Mike and me to understand. He explained that the idea of tax was made popular and accepted by the majority by telling the poor and middle class that tax were created only to punish the rich. This is how the masses voted for the law and it became constitutionally legal. Although it was intended to punish the rich, in reality it wound up punishing the very people who voted for it, the poor and the middle class. Once government got a taste of money, its appetite grew, said Rich Dad. Your dad and I are exactly opposite. He's a government bureaucrat and I am a capitalist. He gets paid and our success is measured on opposite behaviors. He gets paid to spend money and hire people. The more he spends, the more people he hires. The move, the more he spends, the larger his organization becomes. In the government, a large organization is respected organization. On the other hand, within my organization, the fewer people I hire, the less money I spend. The more I am respected by my investors. That's why I don't like government people. They have different objectives. than most business people. As government grows, more and more tax dollars are needed to support it. My educated dad sincerely believed that government should help people. He loved John F. Kennedy and especially the idea of the Peace Corps. He loved the idea so much that both he and my mom worked for the Peace Corps, training volunteers to go to Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. He always strived for additional grants and budget increase so he could hire more people, both in his job and in his education department and the Peace Corps. From the time one I was about 10 years old, I would hear from my rich dad that government workers were a pack of lazy thieves. From my poor dad, I would hear how the rich were greedy crooks and who should be made to pay more taxes. Both sides had valid points. It was difficult to go to work for one of the biggest capitalists in town and come home to a father who was a prominent government leader. It was not easy to know which dad to believe. Yet, when you read or study the history of taxes, an interesting perspective emerges. As I said, the passage of taxes was only possible because the masses believed in the Robin Hood theory of economics. Take from the rich and give to the everyone else. The problem was the government's appetite for money was so great that the taxes soon needed to be levied on the middle class, and from there it kept trickling down. However, the rich saw an opportunity because they don't play by the same set of rules. The rich knew about corporations, which became popular in the day of sailing ships. The rich created corporations as a vehicle to limit their risk to the asset of each voyage. The rich put their money into corporations to finance the voyage. The corporations would then hire a crew to sail to the new world to look for treasure. If the ship was lost, the crew lost their lives, but the loss to the rich would be limited only to the money that they invested for a particular voyage. The diagram that follows shows how the corporate structure sits outside your personal income and balance sheet. It is the knowledge of the legal corporate structure that really gives the rich a vast advantage over the poor and the middle class. Having two fathers teaching me, one a socialist and other a capitalist, I quickly began to realize that the philosophy of the capitalist made me more financial sense to me. It seemed to me that the socialists ultimately penalized themselves due to their lack of financial education. No matter what the take from the rich crowd come up with, the rich always found a way to outsmart them. This is how taxes were eventually levied on the middle class. The rich outsmarted the intellectuals solely because they understood the power of money, a subject not taught in school. How did the rich outsmart the intellectuals? Once the take from the rich tax was passed, cash started flowing into the government coffers. Initially, people were happy. Money were handed to the government. Ini government workers and the rich. It was it went to the government workers in the form of jobs and pension, and it went to the rich via their factories receiving government contracts. The government received a large pool of money, but the problem was the fiscal management of the money. The government ideal is to avoid having excess money. If you fail to spend allotted funds, you risk losing it to the new budget. You would certainly not be recognized for being efficient. Business people, on the other hand, are rewarded for having excess money and are applauded for their efficiency. As this cycle of growing government spending continued, the demand for the money increased, and the tax the rich idea was adjusted to include lower income levels, down to the very people who voted it in, the poor and the middle class. True, capitalists use their financial knowledge to simply find escape. They headed back to the protection of corporations. But what many people who have never formed a corporation don't know is that a corporation is not really a thing. A corporation is merely a file folder with some legal documents in it, sitting in some attorney's office and registered with a state government agency. It's not a big building or a factory or a group of people. A corporation is merely a legal document that creates a legal body without a soul. Using it, the wealth of the rich was once again protected. It's popular because the income tax of a corporation is less than that of an individual. Income tax rate. In addition, certain expertise could be paid by corporations with pre tax dollars. This war between the haves and the haves not has raged for hundreds of years. The battle is waged whenever or wherever laws are made. It too, and it will go on forever. The problem is that the people who lose are the uninformed, the ones who get up every day and diligently go to work and pay taxes. If they only understood the way the rich play the game, they could play it too. They would be on their way to their own financial independence. That is why I cringe every time I hear a parent advise their children to go to school so they can find a safe, secure job. An employee with a safe and secure job without financial aptitude has no escape. Average American work 4 to 5 months for the government just to cover their taxes. In my opinion, that is simply too long. The harder you work, the more you pay the government. That is why I believe that the idea of take from the rich backfired on the very people who voted it in. Every time people try to punish the rich don't simply comply, they react. They have the money, power, and intent to change things. They don't just sit there and voluntarily pay more taxes. Instead, they search for ways to minimize their tax burden. They hire smart attorneys and accountants and persuade politicians to change laws or create legal loopholes. They use their resources to effect change. The tax code of the United States also allows other ways to reduce taxes. Most of the vehicles are available to anyone, but it is the rich who finds them because they are minding their own business, minding their own business. For example, 1031 is a jargon for Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, which allows a seller to delay paying taxes on a piece of real estate that is sold for a capital gain through an exchange for a more expensive piece of real estate. Real estate is one investment vehicle that has a great tax advantage. As long as you keep trading up in value, you'll not be taxed on the gains until you liquidate. People who don't take advantage of these legal taxes savings are missing a great opportunity to build their asset column. The poor and the middle class don't have the same resources. They sit there and let the government needles enter their arms, allow the blood donation to begin. Today, I am constantly shocked at the number of people who pay more taxes or take fewer deductions simply because they are afraid of the government. I have friends who have had their business shut down and destroyed only to find out it was a mistake on the part of the government. I realize all that. But the price of working from January to May is a high price to pay for that intimidation. My poor dad never fought back. My rich dad didn't either. He just played the game smarter, and he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. You may remember the first lesson I learned from my rich dad. I was a little boy of 9 who had to sit and wait for him to choose to talk to me. I sat in his office waiting for him to get to me. He was ignoring me on purpose. He wanted me to recognize his power and to desire to have the power for myself one day. During all these years, I studied, learned from him, and he always reminded me that knowledge is power. And with money comes great power that requires right knowledge to keep it and make it multiply. Without that knowledge, the world pushes you around. Rich Dad constantly reminded Mike and me that the biggest bully was not the boss or the supervisor, but the taxman. The taxman will take more if you let him. The first lesson of having money work for you as opposed to you working for money is all about power. If you work for money, you give the power to your employer. If money works for you, you keep the power and control it. Once we had this knowledge of the power of money working for us, he wanted us to be financially smart and not let anyone or anything push us around. If you are ignorant, it's easy to be bullied. If you know what you're talking about, you have a fighting chance. That's why he paid so much for smart tax accountants and an attorney. It was less expensive to pay them than to pay the government.